Hello, friends. Welcome to No Cap Room. My name is Jake Fischer, senior NBA reporter for Yahoo Sports. Joining me as always, senior NBA writer for Yahoo Sports. It's my man. It's JJ Redick's man. It's your man. It's everyone's man. It's Dan Devine. What is up?
Jake, what was going through your mind as the ball left your hands on that introduction? Did you feel good about it?
Felt really good about it, yeah.
I'm glad I asked the question about how you felt, what you were thinking. Yeah, man, we're getting closer to actually having a second round, which is pretty cool. Like it's the first couple of weeks of the first round always feel like just an intolerable march a little bit, like game after game after game. So we're getting some of these series out of here. My wife is very happy about that. She's a little bit upset that we have the East is still so tied up that she's like, there's only one over now. I was like, yeah, I know. We're trying to move through these so there's some more family time. But for now, we'll linger in the fandom of these series going longer.
Partners of NBA media members across the country are saying, get the Orlando Magic off my TV.
She roots for nothing but sweeps and weirdly, she was like, if we can get all sweeps and also the Knicks aren't in it, because then I wind up out more nights. I'm out more nights than I am home. So she's like, it's unfortunate, but the city's alive with love for the Knicks, but my wife less so.
The city's alive. We're alive. Los Angeles Clippers are on the brink. The Phoenix Suns are not. The Heat are not. Those guys are out. We're gonna get to them in a little bit, but I definitely want to start in LA, where those pesky Clippers, man, put up they scored 93 points, which is a lot in today's hand checking allowed postseason, but they got walloped by 30 and the game was not particularly close. And I was speaking to one member of the Mavericks organization earlier in the week before this game, and the thought to me was definitely that they were going to be, the word was pace. And then sure enough, they start with Kyrie having the ball in his hands and Reggie Miller is talking about how they're trying to run the tempo up and push the pace all game long. And I felt like the word pace was like a drinking game for me specifically on the couch last night because Jamal Crawford kept saying it. But yeah, the Mavericks turned this into a track meet and the Clippers could not make a fucking shot. And this game and the series is heading back to Dallas now with the Mavericks looking like they're in pretty good position to take this thing.
Yeah, I mean, 123-93 is the largest loss, like the most lopsided loss in Clippers playoff history, which you start to feel like, well, that means something given how rocky the Clippers history is. But this is like, it clears the bar if they got to the playoffs. So it's not like the worst loss overall in Clippers history, but in the postseason, it's a tough one. And one of the biggest wins in Mavericks postseason history. And I think, our super producer, John Gennaro, noted in our docs here, like not our docs, we're not doxing anybody with our rundown. The story of the game was the Dallas defense. And that's really, it's what it's been since the trade deadline, really, right? I mean, the moves that they made to bring in Daniel Gafford, bring in PJ Washington, be able to play with more size all the time has dramatically sort of altered what this team could be. They held the Clippers to a 90.2 offensive rating in Game 5, according to Cleaning the Glass. That is
what would that rank season-wise?
I'm about to tell you, Jake. It would be the worst Clippers offensive performance of the whole season. Like they have not scored less efficiently this year. It would be the Clippers' worst postseason offensive game since Game 4 of the 2021 Western Conference Finals against Phoenix. So going back 3 years, it's the worst playoff offense that they've played. And you could say part of that is obviously Kawhi Leonard's not there. They also haven't had Kawhi Leonard for most of the last few postseasons either. So, this is even grading against the curve. It was a really rocky one. And if you're looking anywhere to start with in terms of the way the Clippers offense fell apart, you've got to look at the stars who were on the court. And the one who's going to get the most attention, the most headlines is James Harden.
It definitely will, especially after he was like a pseudo hero and the Game 4 flipping floaters in left and right. And this has been the James Harden playoff experience, though, throughout his entire career. He's putting up 40 against Boston in Game 1 and then doing an absolute dud a season ago. And I think the scary hours for the Clippers here is
what a renewable resource that phrase has been. Several teams now. It really works pretty much. Any container you need to put it in, it'll fit.
We could use that for the system too. The system wasn't exactly humming last night.
System was down. Shouts out to the cheat and Homestar Runner.
We need the IT department to come get that system back up. IT is not Isaiah Thomas. He's out too. I think.
If there's one thing Steve Ballmer should have, it's an IT department on hand, right? You should figure.
You would think. I think ultimately last night, no matter what, the Clippers are not winning if Paul George and James Harden aren't making shots. That's pretty straightforward. To me, it just kind of seemed like they don't know what to do if those guys aren't feeling good at all. Like, there's one thing if they're just like getting good looks and they're not falling. But when you start to see hesitancy, and I couldn't count them because I wasn't in the arena cross-checking all the play-by-play and was just also like half, locked in when you're on the couch.
Sure.
Countless times, to me, I'm sure someone could count them, how many driving kicks just went like 3 feet too far to the right to the shooter. And Terrence Mann was typically the one on the receiving end of that stuff. I felt bad for Terrence Mann. Terrence Mann was just doing what he could do out there, man. I think it was like pretty abundantly clear the lack of shooting that the Clippers have when Kawhi isn't in the rotation. And the Amir Coffey kind of like short rolly guy is great, but then like off the bench, your 8-man rotation, just including Mason Plumlee and Russell Westbrook, when Russ turns into a pumpkin, I mean, that there was this one sequence that really stood out to me in that last second quarter sprint that Dallas used like a 10-2 run to take a pretty commanding double-digit lead into the half. Like at the 2-minute mark, the Clippers had the ball for basically the whole minute. And it's James in pick and roll doing what he does. He completely misses Russ for the cross-court alley-oop coming down the baseline on the dunker spot that like tore the house down in Game 4. And then the ball swings back out to Harden in the corner, and he's just kind of dribbling between his legs with no daylight at all. It gets to Russ on the wing. He's no threat to shoot at all. And Mason Plumlee is an absolute zero when he's not having a clear runway to the rim. They got 3 offensive rebounds for nothing. And the second the Mavericks finally got the ball, Kyrie took 2 dribbles and threw a half-court lob to Daniel Gafford. Right. And to me, that was like a perfect encapsulation of what this game was, where Dallas was trying to get out and they were defending. Kyrie and Luka getting down in stances and being in these guys' faces has been some of the most fun part of the playoffs for me to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right to focus in on with like the Russell Westbrook, the Mason Plumlee, the Terrence Mann, the Amir Coffey. Like the Clippers have these guys who need things created for them. Like Russell Westbrook to a lesser extent, but he's a more contingent player now than he ever has been. And what you see is when James Harden is able to be the system, when he's able to get downhill, draw help, and he's making shots early, and the threat of him knocking shots down, it pulls the defense in. That opens up the space and the opportunities for those other guys. Paul George is not, he's a very credible playmaker, but he's not the guy who's going to put the ball like, I figure out how the guy likes the lines up, likes the lines on the ball when he catches it, and it's going to be in the shooting pocket, on time, on target, perfectly ready to go every time. He's not that kind of playmaker. Harden is. So if you are able to throw some sand in the gears of his operation early, which I love that you mentioned Kyrie's defensive stance. Like, I think first possession of the game, he's pressuring Harden like full court. He's making sure he's like fighting over the top of screens. It's ball pressure. I'm like pushing you out on your catch further out. Like setting a tone, which is not something we would often attribute to Kyrie Irving defensively, but that was the way that they attacked Harden all night. Everybody was sort of game plan disciplined with the way they were shading. Obviously, you want him to get to his right hand, but don't just give him the red carpet. Like, make him feel you. The help was ready on time, but getting Harden out of his rhythm early pays major dividends down the line because all those guys rely on Harden to pump the blood through the offense. And if he's not doing that, then where is the shot creation coming from? And what you saw is there was about a quarter and a half of the Clippers could keep afloat with that. And then just the bottom absolutely fell out of the offense because none of those guys were getting the service that allows them to be their best. And they weren't able to create on their own. And you weren't getting you had Paul George and James Harden in quicksand. And some of that is just like the Clippers lacking the requisite shot creation and shot making talent. But a lot of it is like the Mavs forced that to happen. Derrick Jones Jr. was like star performance in terms of his defensive work on Paul George in that game. Absolutely. Kyrie deserves a ton of credit. Luka playing through the sprained knee in the cold, like still digging in defensively. Those guys locked in. They didn't let the job get done. Like, oh, well, I got blown past once or I got beat off the screen once. Game over. Like PJ Washington coming to swat the James Harden layup from behind. Kyrie getting over there and poking the ball out from behind. Multiple efforts on these defensive possessions. It's not who the Mavericks typically have been, but it's who they've been since the trade deadline. And it's a big reason why they're one game away from the second round.
I also think it's so interesting that Luka clearly prefers to walk the dog all the way up the court and check the weather and see the breeze, and then 9 seconds left on the clock, call up a big man, and then go to work. And people on the Mavs have just been saying all year long that when they're playing with pace, again, take a drink, that they have just a different level of offense. And it was most sharp, I think, in their internal evaluations, seeing Dante Exum come off the bench and just get downhill and drive and kick and get the ball pinging around the perimeter and all that type of stuff. This game, there's no real way to like quantify it. To me, there was like an ineffable, palpable, they're doing both at the same time. Like they were getting it up the floor and getting into stuff. And then, all right, there's nothing here. Let's just Kyrie's swinging it over to Luka and he's calling up Gaffer or Lively or whoever, and they're getting something going. So I do wonder if this is one of those series where like it's 2-2, just like Denver Phoenix last year, where it's 2-0 Denver, the Suns figured some stuff out, then Denver just whopped them for the last couple games. Not the exact same format here, but I do kind of wonder if the Mavs, especially with Kawhi out, if the Mavs are just kind of figured out what they need to do here. And we'll see if that occurs in Game 6 on Friday.
Yeah, obviously a big part of adjusting the sliders there would be the Clippers can't survive another 7 points from Harden and 15 points from Paul George. Harden in particular is obviously the one to keep the closest eye on. You mentioned that this is a very familiar script at this point for Harden. You know, going back last season in Philly, the 2 monster performances with Embiid out, but then the whisper quiet other ones. 2 of 12 shooting, which Nick Wright, former guest for Vinny Goodwill, noted this on Twitter. He surfaced this stat, which is kind of wild. Harden now holds the NBA record for most playoff games with 10 or more field goal attempts and 2 or fewer makes. That was his 10th game like that in the playoffs, which is a lot. And the question, the issue is always like, well, when it gets hard, when the chips are down, what will the response be? And from Dylan Hernandez of the Los Angeles Times, quote, as Harden walked down the hallway leading from the locker room to the players' parking lot, he was approached by Times reporter Broderick Turner, who asked him if he would stop by the interview room. Harden mouthed no and continued on his way out. So you go from whisper quiet to not even whispering on the way out of the building. And that's a tough look. And now you need significantly better on the road in your backs against the wall elimination game. He is capable of that. Paul George is capable of that, the shot making. But I think the thing that you sort of noted, Dallas being a team that now can make it hard on you. And then when you make it hard on them, they still have the lock picks. They still have the answers. They can play with pace. They can get ahead of the sticks. But also, like, they finally got Luka, even through the ailment and the illness, like looking like Luka. And a big part of that was just he's been such a pile driver getting downhill, a battering ram at the paint. 25 drives last night, 9 for 12 from the floor on those drives, 5 assists coming out of his pass outs, dunks, threes, like the lob threats and the kickouts, the driving kick. The corner threes were a huge part of it. Maxi Kleba I believe made 4 corner threes, 5 total. Like, you get those role player games out of what you create from your stars. The Mavs stars created those opportunities. Guys like Kleba and Derek Jones Jr. I think Josh Green made a corner 3 too. Like, those guys cashed out. Yeah.
4-point play. Mason Plumlee.
So, they cash out on those opportunities. The Clippers stars need to create those for the Mavs. Otherwise, they're going to be heading home. And heading home in the first round at this stage where James Harden's hitting unrestricted free agency, Paul George still has not signed that extension. You're opening up the $1 billion toilet dome. Like, there's a lot going on. Everybody in the world seems to want Ty Lue to coach their team, but he can only coach one of them. It's a lot on the line for the Clippers heading into Game 6 in Dallas.
Yeah, let's save the potential post-mortem Clipper stuff for when we talk about Phoenix, because there's a connection there with your Ty Lue.
Teaser alert, yeah.
Teaser alert. The Heat are heading home. They are done. 4-1. It was a magical game 2.
We'll always have game 2.
And then everything else kind of went completely haywire for them. I mean, there's not much to say here. The Heat were without their 2, I don't even think it's arguable, best creators in Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier. We'll always have Tyler Hero game 2, but he did not seem to bottle up whatever playmaking, patience, and floor quarterbacking that he discovered for the first time fully in his career. That did not travel back down to South Beach or back up to Boston. So it just, I know from Heat fans in my life with my ladies' South Florida connections, but also like seeing our friends of the pod, like Rohan Nadkarni, talking about it on Twitter. This was kind of like just a tumultuous season from the beginning for the Heat, where, the Dame thing hung over the entire offseason. And then this was just kind of like a run it back of, can we just make the 8 seed and get to the finals again? And it never really felt exactly like that. 8th in the East, 46-36 record, 17th in net rating, 21st in offense, which that was always kind of the issue, right? Like, and I think that really bore itself out here in the postseason, especially with the greater physicality, let's say, the defenses are allowed to use out there right now.
Yeah, they are not. This team as constructed cannot score enough points unless they go on a 3-point heater. And that's what led to their finals run last season, was everybody on the roster starting to make 40% of their threes. The one game where they set a franchise record for 3-point makes is the one they won. Even with that one explosive performance, they netted out to barely a point per possession in this series. And obviously a lot of credit for that does go to Boston with it was an elite defense all year, the length they have on the perimeter, the challenges that they can pose for an opposing offense, and the fact that without Jimmy, without Terry Rozier, without consistent shot making elsewhere, Jaime Jaquez was out for the final game of that series with a hip pointer or hip injury rather.
I think final 2, right?
Final 2. And
to your point, he was handling a ton of the actual quote unquote point guard reps in that game 2 win.
Yeah. So an important person for bringing the ball up and relieving the pressure and making decisions. And in the absence of any of that shot creation, decision making, etc., it's basically, can Bam Adebayo make enough mid-elbow jumpers, mid-foul line jumpers to keep you in the game? And you're not going to be able to. The one shout out for Boston is Derek White was the best player in the series. Made 21 threes in the series. 16 assists to 6 turnovers, 58% from the floor. It would just, every time the ball swung to him, something good happened. Every time he was involved in the action, something good happened with his customary good defense. So that obviously a team that has basically been built around having 6 starters, quote unquote, this season. They slide in Al Horford for Kristaps Porzingis, don't miss a beat, and remains to be seen. Chris Haynes reported last night the expectation is it's likely that Porzingis would miss all of round 2, and they would hope to get him back for the Eastern Conference Finals should they survive past round 2. The performance you saw last night gives you some hope there. As far as Miami, though, some of the questions that we had heading into last offseason that were a big driver in the Damian Lillard conversation persist, right? Like that was not a good enough half-court offense. It was not good enough at shot creation. Miami, as you mentioned, the 21st in offensive rating. Even with having Terry Rozier there, who I think played pretty well for them when he wasn't injured. This team finished bottom 10 in the league in points scored per possession, effective field goal percentage, frequency of shots at the rim, accuracy, shooting at the rim, and maybe most damning because they constantly play clutch games, 27th in offense in crunch time. Like score was within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. They do not generate easy enough baskets, even with Jimmy Butler on the floor. They need more pathways to creating that. And I think the big question, like the huge one hanging over this offseason now, is how do you get to that? And I think the central figure in that discussion, because we're talking about a capped out team essentially with most of those guys under contract, to me that is Tyler Hero, because there's now a large enough sample size going over several years that when you've actually got your main guys on the floor, you're just not good enough offensively. Looked this up on play-by-play stats this morning. Since 2020, nearly 3,000 minutes of Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler Hero together. They're only plus 3.9 points per 100, and their offense is below league average. Like, if that's the base you're building off of, what are you building? And if that's the question you've got, like, you're not trading Bam because he is the standard bearer for the culture. The Jimmy question is a big one. We'll talk about that. But Hero, to me, it's like, I think the league told you last summer, we don't view that guy as a star level piece, like a future all-star to build a big deal around. So then what can you do with him? I think that's going to be one of the more interesting questions in the league this summer.
Yeah, his value got thrust into the forefront of the NBA trade landscape when I don't know where it fully originated from, but I remember it being June 30th. And being in the backyard of my friend's house in Atlanta, where I was posted up for the start of free agency, and Dame requests the trade publicly, formally. It happens, and it was almost instantly that the word was that Portland had no interest, and that if there was going to be a Damian Lillard trade, there was going to be a 3-team trade, being that Tyler Hero was going to have to be sent to a different party. And that word was pretty well known around the league. And there was a couple of teams that had come up at the time. Chicago was one. Brooklyn was one of teams that were interested, and don't 100% know all of the specifics. But the Brooklyn one was part attached to could they get off of Ben Simmons' contract in that deal. So I don't know exactly how much the Nets were pining for Tyler Hero in that scenario. Chicago, I think it was a little bit attached to getting off of Zach LaVine's contract. So that's just to say, I can't necessarily tell you a team right now that comes immediately top of mind that's going to be pounding the table to acquire him and that contract. But Miami's got a ton of other situations to explored, because that is a big swing piece for sure. But that's kind of what are the Warriors gonna do about Andrew Wiggins equivalent for Miami? Miami needs to figure out what Jimmy Butler's extension talks are going to net. And that's the same thing in New Orleans with Brandon Ingram. Those types of conversations, same thing with Donovan Mitchell with his extension in Cleveland. You don't have to re-sign this guy right now. You don't have to come up with an extension number right now. But what truths come out across that table, or whatever the conversation actually includes, that is going to set the course for all of this, because Jimmy turns 35 in September. And who's to say what is going to come if you give him another 4-year, approaching $200 million contract, when the injuries have already started to pile up. And that is the biggest, no matter what, question that the Heat have to address. We could talk about Haywood Highsmith and Caleb Martin and Kevin Love having player options, but the Jimmy thing is 100% going to be what governs and rules the day of every other decision tree that comes down from the main stump or whatever the analogy is for what Jimmy Butler's long-term future is going to be with the Heat.
Is Pat Riley the stump? All the decisions flow from the stump, right? I don't know.
I guess so.
But I feel concerned for having said that. I'm like worried it's going to be a knock on the door. Some guys sped here from Schenectady. I think that it's Jimmy. Yeah, I mean, they're going to be 35. Has not played 65 games since the year he split between Minnesota and Philly. So has not played. I think 64 last season was the most he's played as a member of the Heat. Obviously, pandemic shortened seasons are a part of that, but also obviously like the avatar of the culture, like the sort of most significant piece to the team, the one that elevates their ceiling, elevates their floor. It's a fascinating question because you are not going to just sort of, if you don't extend him, then you would like Jimmy. I don't know that Jimmy's going to be particularly happy to not be extended. And we've seen an unhappy Jimmy create some interesting circumstances at different organizations in the past. And also, what's your roadmap moving out from there? If you say we don't feel comfortable building the next several years of our roster around Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, then out of what are you building it? I think that it ties back into the hero question, because the guy I was thinking about in relation to like the league doesn't think that's a star for a star trade. So then what do you do? Not saying that they are the same guy, not saying that they function the same way. RJ Barrett wasn't going to be enough to get the Donovan Mitchell deal done, right? He wasn't going to be like the main piece of that. RJ Barrett winds up being the main matching salary in the deal that brings back OG Anunoby, a lower order player, but an important player for a Knicks team that made the playoffs. But he was not the most important part of that deal, right? That was from Toronto's perspective, Emmanuel Quickley, as like this guy could be our starting point guard, someone who we think has all-star upside. So then for Miami, like again, not saying that these are one-to-one situations, but if you don't know exactly what you want to build around, how do you then attach like a Nikola Jovic or a Jaime Jaquez as the sweetener in a hero deal? If you don't believe that Hero's the guy to build around, how do you move off of that to get something worth building back while also giving up? Like there's a lot of moving parts here. And I don't know that I see the immediate like push button, we are now a 55-win team again move. Of course, I'm not, Pat Riley and that front office, the very smart people who operate and have operated and kept that team consistently competitive for, titles and deep playoff runs for years. I have to imagine that they've got a lot more tricks up their sleeve than I'd see coming. But I think that they're coming. Tim Reynolds at the Associated Press, who covers the Heat closely down there, tweeted this last night. It was a Riley quote from the beginning of the season. Quote, if you build a team around one or two players, three players, and you don't win the championship, then you might have to start thinking, okay, this is not going to work. It's not going to happen. And the history of Pat Riley suggests that when he thinks that, things change in pretty dramatic ways. So I know that the general thing is like you look at the financial structure, the assets available for move, the trade, draft picks, et cetera, and you think maybe there's not a whole lot of avenues for the Heat to get better. I think they're still going to make an awful lot of effort to get there, because I think that they now have enough evidence to look at it and say, like, we caught lightning in a bottle a couple times, but we can't guarantee the storm's going to keep raining down.
The Heat are also a team that is going to be hurtling against the second apron, which is going to impact a ton of teams' decision-making this summer, which we will get into a little bit in further detail when we vibe check the Phoenix Suns after we pay some bills and take this break. Welcome back to No Cap Room, here with JJ Redick's favorite NBA writer, Dan Devine.
You got to stop it. You simply must.
It's just awesome that he supports you to the degree that he does.
He tweeted like two nice things 2 times. Listen, we'll take all the nice things we can get. You often get less than nice things tweeted about you, so it's pretty good to get any of them.
It's very true. The Phoenix Suns had a lot of not nice things tweeted about them since they were eliminated very swiftly by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Game 4 was fun. It was competitive, but the series did not seem too competitive. That was, to me, the feeling I was feeling about the general vibes of Phoenix before Game 4 was, if you go back to last season in the playoffs, before they went out and made the Bradley Beal trade, of course, but the Nuggets absolutely annihilated Phoenix in games 5 and 6. And then the Suns were not even close in any, really, of the first 3 games of that series. That, to me, was the real reaction of, it's not just like, oh, this is a tough fought thing. Like, to be down by 30 in a couple of these fourth quarters, or not 30, but 25, whatever the exact differential was, they were not contests. And it's similar with Miami, right? Where if like you're not even in a punching distance away when you're already having this big of a tax bill, and Phoenix is even more in the hole compared to the Heat, where basically right now they don't do anything besides bring back Royce O'Neal to even just like a market value contract. They're going to be flirting with a $200 million cap sheet before they then start paying taxes, and you calculate what the actual bill that Matt Ishbia is going to have to pay is. So there's a lot to discuss and a lot to break down and think about this team. But what I want to start with is that I tuned in to Matt Ishbia's press conference from Phoenix yesterday, and the Suns from him, and then James Jones, who spoke afterwards. And what I'd been hearing all week being on the phone about it, like, the Suns are not in panic mode. They are telling us that. They do not think their house is on fire, which I believe Ishbia said multiple times. Might have said it more than Reggie Miller and Jamal Crawford said pace during the Dallas Mavericks offensive possessions. And they are confident that they are positioned to get access to their 2024 first-round pick, which I believe is slated for number 22, and then their 2031 pick. So they have 2 first-rounders to play with. They have 2 seconds to play with. But here's where things start to get really tricky, because they are, without a doubt, going to be in the second apron unless they decide to do drastic things that they're not going to do, because they made it pretty clear. Phoenix's plan is pretty much going to be to run this thing back. They're happy to say that they've got their whole starting 5 on the books for next year, and they're just going to need to rearrange some of the window dressing and see what happens better. And if that's the case, like, wading into this second apron world, they are not going to be able to get back any more salary than they send out in trades. They are not going to be able to aggregate contracts together. So one example, they could not put Yusuf Nurkic and Nasir Little together to go get a $25 million player. You're just not allowed to do that.
Right.
You're not going to be able to have the mid-level exception. You are not going to be able to sign and trade and get stuff back. They're also going to be forfeiting their 2032 pick. Just going to be frozen until they potentially could get out of the second apron, but they're not going to.
Right. If they're not trading Kevin Durant or Bradley Beal, they're not getting out of the second apron.
Exactly. And one thing I learned from talking to some cap strategists around the league this week, teams are kind of positioning themselves to make like a 2-year kind of all-in run. So the question I am looking to ask Matt Ishbia more than anything is, does the money truly does not matter, and you're just going to be fronting the bill? And to what end, or is there no end? Because they're basically going to be in the second apron for the next couple of years. It just means their pick is going to be frozen, while other teams are definitely looking at it as, well, you can only, if you're in the apron for year 1, so year 1 for this intent and purposes is 24-25. Over the next 4 years, if you're in the apron again twice, so 3 out of 5 years, that 2032 pick is no longer just frozen. It is forced to be the 30th pick in the draft.
Yeah, it moves all the way to the bottom of the first round.
And then it's just there. It's stuck. It's done. So Minnesota, interestingly enough, they are pretty much stacking their books to the point where Mike Conley's 2-year extension ends after this 2 year. They're going to be in potential in the second. They're basically going to be in the apron no matter what. Second apron next year, Minnesota. And then Rudy Gobert's got a player option. Naz Reid's got a player option. They kind of have this like perfect 2-year window set up to be in the apron, freeze that pick, and then they can get out. And then that pick becomes unfrozen later down the line. Phoenix doesn't have that opportunity. And I don't know necessarily what changing Frank Vogel is going to do for this team when that is the circumstance. Dan, do you have any thoughts on that particular aspect of this equation and all the questions that are being asked about the Phoenix Suns right now?
Yeah, I mean, the segment is a vibe check. And I think the argument behind the offseason moves last summer was that the vibes had gotten rancid under Monty Williams, right? Like DeAndre Ayton was lost. They could not continue to bring back Chris Paul and expect him to be healthy. What had the positivity of that finals run had, long since frittered away and was gone. And so it was like, even if you didn't totally believe Frank Vogel was going to be like, I don't know, like an injection of adrenaline straight into the heart of Phoenix Suns basketball, or that Yusuf Nurkic was going to be a dramatic improvement over DeAndre Ayton or whatever. It was like, well, what we had wasn't working anymore. And we were already like halfway through changing that. So might as well rip the Band-Aid off the rest of the way and, get busy living or get busy dying. And I think you find yourself in a similar set of circumstances now where Frank Vogel, there is a reasonable argument to be made that like you brought him there basically to say, I don't know how the hell we're going to make a defense out of this team, but you know how to do that. And you have a championship on your resume. So like we can sell it and do something. And then they were like a slightly above average defense with that roster, which, you could argue like mission accomplished, job well done, Frank. But this is the NBA and it's a personality-based business and it's a relationships-based business, right? And if the judging by the fact that there were stories ready to hit publish on the second the buzzer and sounded for them that were like, Kevin Durant doesn't like his role in the offense. They stopped listening to Frank Vogel. They were laughing when he was trying to get tough with them. It's like, well, then whether Frank Vogel is right or not is almost immaterial. Like if the team's not listening to him and he no longer has the ear, then somebody else would need to come in to get it. I think the main question is like, who will have the ear of superstars? Like, I mean, if you are, while the stories about I had to stop myself from laughing at Frank Vogel raising his voice to us, those are anonymously sourced comments. I think but you have to raise the question of like, you have superstars on this roster, or you have two superstars and you have Bradley Beal who's being paid like a superstar, and you need a coach to come in and command their respect, right? Who's that? Who's going to do it? And who's going to command their respect to a level where like, if Kevin Durant doesn't like being spaced behind the 3-point line and shooting threes, like, well, your offense sucked when no one was shooting threes and somebody needs to, and Grayson Allen was hurt. So like, sometimes you got to do the job, right? Who's going to get them to do that? Who's going to convince those guys that instead of playing the way they want to play, they might need to play a little bit of a different way to make it work? And not to demonize Kevin Durant in that conversation. I mean, like, Kevin Durant played his ass off defensively this season. He was an all-NBA caliber player. He was the most durable and accountable of all of those guys during the regular season. But I think assuming that a contender is just waiting there because you bring back the starting five of a team that won 49 games and then got absolutely drilled in round one, as it assumes facts not clear in evidence. And so I think Kevin Durant has not necessarily seemed particularly thrilled with any way that anybody has wanted him to play for a while.
James Jones said no one has maximized Kevin Durant, and the Phoenix Suns plan to be the first team to do it. So that's not reassuring. I don't know what is.
Yeah, of course. I guess we've sort of memory hold the point where he was playing off Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, because that was a pretty maximized Kevin Durant. But
I thought the same thing.
But anyway, all that to be said, like, you were giving minutes, to Drew Eubanks in the series. You were giving minutes to Eric Gordon in this series. You were giving minutes to, Thaddeus Young buyout signing didn't wind up making too much of an impact in this series. Like, Josh Okogie wound up getting off the bench in this series. Like there's not a lot of there once you get past that starting five. Even if you believe that starting five is championship caliber, what happens after that matters a great deal. And I think the thing that what this series showed as much as anything was, I think there was a way to look at the Suns, and I fell prey to this too. Like I picked the Suns to win this series because I thought they matched up fantastically with Minnesota, and I'm thinking like in the context of a postseason series, they fit better what the postseason is because they're going to have multiple guys who can create shots. And the reality is Minnesota fit a lot better for what the postseason is because Minnesota could play harder and more physically and absolutely shut your water off. And the Suns did not have another way to play. And so how do you find more guys that give you another way to play, ramp up that level of physicality? Like a finesse team only kind of gets so far when they're not creating consistent shots. And so I don't know what the answer is to get that to that point. Coaching is a big part of that, but also, like, as you mentioned, limited avenues to get that second influx of talent behind those top guys. And so, like, I get Matt Ishbia saying we're not in a good position, we're in a great position. I think that feels like you're looking at things through a certain lens that I don't know that, and I understand why he thinks that because he owns the thing. I think that you're going to need to see some more reinforcements coming in, and I don't know how they get them.
The Suns can absolutely look at this and say the team that just destroyed us, they were kind of in a very similar boat. They made a huge trade, emptied the war chest. They were the laughing stock of the league. Oh, the Rudy Gobert trade was such a disaster. They go out in the first round very quietly. Of course, they're missing Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid, but Phoenix is missing Grayson Allen for the majority of the series. They come back. Bradley Beal, this is going to be his first full healthy offseason in like half a decade. People talk about Brad as like he's 35. He's still in his prime in theory, just around 30. Like you swap out you look around the playoffs right now, the guys who are on minimums who are thriving are just absolutely huge swing pieces for their team. Like we talked about Derek Jones at the top during the Dallas stuff. For the Mavs to find a legitimate two-way starter at the minimum who's now like creating off the dribble and attacking closeouts and figuring out how to be some type of like hybrid big in the dunker, but also a corner three-point shooter. Kelly Oubre being this bulldog who's making Jalen Brunson work harder than almost anyone has all season. Like those are the types of signings. The Suns need one of those to work out without a doubt. Then there's like a couple of people and a school of thought going around the league that like Phoenix, if the money thing isn't an issue, Phoenix probably will be best served massively overpaying Royce O'Neal, giving him some type of 2-year, $40 million team option or a 1-year deal like Bruce Brown got because then you could trade him for 2 pieces back, which that's going to cost $60 million in tax penalties if you're paying roughly 60. I don't know the exact math in front of me, but that is the ballpark of what that extra flexibility will cost you. So I could understand why looking at the coach would be a quick fix, because James Jones and Matt Ishbia made it very clear during their press availability that the questions and the pleas for a point guard, they would just rather have the ball in one of those 3 guys' hands instead. And you could say that there would be benefit in getting someone to just make sure all these guys are getting an even diet of their shots and getting them in the spots that they want. But like, how many players are going to be available at the equivalent of Nasir Little's $7-ish million? I mean, TJ McConnell has been a name that's been around that organization's, proverbial wish list for a while, but there aren't many players like that who are also like available for the taking. Yeah. So that's going to be a real challenge. I just don't. And to go back to the vibes of this all, the whole league saw Frank Vogel going absolutely ballistic on the sidelines and losing his composure. And it was not a good look. It was definitively not a good look. Like, I was surprised how that has been such a consistent piece of conversation in my phone calls this week. Just about eyes popping out of his face, complaining about the officials and jumping up and down. And that's not exactly the way to go back into that locker room or that huddle and get these guys to buy back in. But Mike Budenholzer, to my knowledge, was never really a serious candidate last year going around for this particular job in Phoenix. And there's no guarantee he is going to come in and relate to these guys differently and better. While then you're also paying Frank Vogel $24 million to not work for you. And the guy that's been on their wish list from a coaching standpoint, it's been very well known, Ty Lue, he's not going to be available. Because of all the interest from Phoenix and elsewhere, he got his 24-25 year of his contract guaranteed. And the Clippers, knowing that this guy on their books is so widely regarded, they're not just going to let Ty Lue walk for nothing. They're not just going to let him out of his deal and say goodbye. Like, the recent precedent for giving over your head coach, Doc Rivers to the Clippers from Boston, Jason Kidd to Milwaukee after that from Brooklyn, first round pick, which we already discussed. The Suns don't exactly have a ton of those in the war chest. So Ishbia said Wednesday that hasn't even had a conversation yet about what to do about Vogel or James Jones or whoever. I would think that those conversations will be wrapped up by the end of this week as he's in town and talking to people and whatever. But I'm right here, right now on Thursday at 11:11 Eastern. I'm not seeing an obvious replacement. And like, there's always been a proverbial school of thought, or prevailing school of thought, not proverbial, that you don't fire the coach unless you really know who you're going to be replacing him with. And they're just Doc's in Milwaukee. Like, there's been such a retread of coaches the last couple of years that those options are pretty much limited to Bud. And that's not to say I don't think Bud couldn't do a better job. I think there's such few coaches that are actually going to like enter a situation and dramatically change everything. And I don't really know what better outcomes are out there outside of trying to regroup and run this thing back. Then again, what we saw, clearly Frank was frustrated and coming from a place of like desperation. That was bubbling to a head in all of his sideline antics. Like, it was a clear human experience what was happening there. If that is the tip of the iceberg indicating how split he became from his players, which the eye rolling, what have you, has been going on for a large stretch of time, I would say. And part of it too is like Vogel's coaching staff, dating back to the pre-trade deadline, they only trusted 5 dudes anyway.
Yeah.
So like, how does that set a good grounds for like a connective team that's all moving in the same direction if the coaches only want to play 5 guys?
Yeah, it was the old it was the Nick Nurse in Toronto question of like, is he only playing 5 guys because the other guys aren't worthy of trust, or do the other guys not play well because he doesn't trust them? And like, so do you need to give him a better roster, or does he need to better use what he's got in the house? I don't know how much the Suns are going to be able to improve the roster behind those 5 guys. So whoever is coaching, whether it's Vogel or somebody else, is going to have to figure out how to make do with what he's got. But I think I have the answer, Jake. I think I've got an idea for coach that players would respect, vibes elevator, potentially available and not under contract to coach anywhere else.
Don't say what I think you're going to say.
I don't know. Ricky Rubio. Get him back from Spain. Bring
That's
him over.
That's a great answer. I thought you were going to say JJ.
No. Well, listen, I wouldn't presume to lean on our friendship in that way. But listen, Rubio, vibes elevator. You wrote a great piece about that last summer where like the guards he's mentored, the people he's elevated along the way, Devin Booker being one of them.
There you go. Jinx.
So you bring back franchise, an important part of the elevation of that franchise. You bring him back. certainly knows his stuff from an X's and O's perspective. I don't know. I'm like, he might not be interested, but I'd at least make the phone call.
On a serious note, there's going to be some type of change on the coaching staff because lead assistant Kevin Young, who was the highest paid assistant in the league, another element of Matt Ishbia, spend, try to make this thing the premier franchise in all of sports, not the NBA, all of sports. And there's it's a hole on the bench. He's leaving for BYU for a very, very long-term deal, which is a great opportunity for KY, who's been a young coach in the rising head coaching candidate pool for a long time. People definitely thought he could have been a potential to go to Nick Nurse. He could have been a potential lever to pull. You make Frank Vogel your Dwayne Casey and make Kevin Young your Nick Nurse, but that's just not an option anymore. And I wonder I don't have a sense yet, but whether it's Chicago, they moved on from Chris Fleming on Billy Donovan's bench, and Mo Cheeks is moving to a different role. Steve Kerr has to address some things on his coaching staff. There's going to be a lot of first, second assistant seats being swapped around the league. That is one opportunity for Phoenix to do something to inject some type of new voice onto that bench, even if they don't end up moving on for Frank Vogel. So from that to the one second round series that we have locked in stone, Minnesota and Denver, the Tim Connolly Bowl. That's going to be something that you're going to hear plenty, I'm sure. But to me, this is the reigning NBA champs who looked a class above everybody else last year, looking a little bit fragile and not as locomotive humming in every direction possible in the first round against the Lakers. That was a tough 5-game series where LA led for 150 minutes of those 5 games compared to Denver's 50, which there's one cool inevitability aspect of Denver in there. But across the aisle, you have probably the one roster that is best matched up size-wise to go against the Nuggets. And they have an ascending superstar in Anthony Edwards, unlike any other player in the league. I'd say the 2 players that are on the rise right now, that to the point where it's injecting this overall wave that is lifting everyone, is Ant and Jalen Brunson. I don't think there's anyone else in the league who is having that type of impact right now. Tyrese Halliburton's obviously the culture setter in Indiana, and they're having a strong run, but they did not put away Milwaukee, and now there's plenty of buzz about Dame and Giannis potentially coming back for Game 6. You can't play with your feud and just take care of business when the opportunity strikes. Ant did not play with a pea on his plate. That dude was feasting all series long. I do wonder if he would have had as monstrous of a performance if his idol Kevin Durant wasn't across the aisle. I do think that was an added element for him. This is going to be a similar thing, being that Denver are the reigning champs who beat them last year. And there's so much connectivity between these two teams. Chris Finch and the lead assistant in Minnesota, Micah Nori, who will be coaching this team at least through Game 1, to my understanding at this point, after Finch, our former No Cap Room guest, really sad. I didn't watch the game live. I watched it back yesterday on my monitor while I was making calls. I saw the clip on Twitter and stuff the day after, but watching the full him on the ground, the team huddle around him, Leonard Miller and someone else holding up a towel to block him from fans holding up a phone, and the long walk where they have to pull a chair away to get him at, was just a tough watch. Shout out Finchie. Please feel better soon. But those guys worked together in Denver and were integral in helping shift the tide to that team being a Nikola Jokic team. So that whole synergy is super, super interesting. You've got Monty Morris on the other side of things.
That's right.
There's just a lot of these teams were kind of destined to run into each other. And there was someone I talked to yesterday who said this matchup is for the finals. I'm not willing to go that far necessarily, but that is definitely the type of stakes that are on the balance here. Like, this is going to be, to me, without a doubt, the best series of the second round.
It certainly has the potential to be. I mean, these were two of the three best teams in the West all season, constantly sort of tug of war, nip and tuck for the number one seed. It's sort of impossible to look at the way that the Timberwolves are constructed with two huge bigs, length at every position, athleticism at every position. It's an elite defensive team with multiple ways to shut you down, and not think that they were built with what Tim Connolly built in Denver in mind. Like, if the league is going to go through Nikola Jokic and through the way that 5-man line, and through Jamal Murray and through the way that 5-man lineup can manipulate coverages, create openings, how do you combat it? How do you work through it? It's like, well, you have to build a defense that can can make up for mistakes or can close gaps with just length and athleticism and ferocity. And that is who the Timberwolves have been all season. I think that when you look at the on-ball matchups, like I haven't gotten to do a ton of deep research on this one. Ben Rohrbach is writing our preview of this for Yahoo Sports. I'm not sure when that's going to go up, but it will be soon. I think a guy that I thought might have a big impact in the first round, then wound up that being right, was Nickeil Alexander-Walker as a long, athletic, aggressive, great on-ball defender. That you're going to need multiple guys to throw at Jamal Murray. I think the first step to mitigating Denver in any way is, can you interrupt or dampen at all the two-man game with Murray and Jokic? You're not going to be able to do only but so much with Jokic, but now the fact that they have their bigs healthy, you have Karl Towns there, you have Naz Reid there, you can work with that sort of lurker defense of like putting one of those guys on Jokic and then putting Rudy Gobert behind that. Like, it's the best version of that kind of tactical approach you can apply against the Nuggets. And even that is only going to do so much. We talk about, it being a rough series for Denver in the first round. The down game Jokic had was 25, 20, and 9. So like there's kind of only so much you're going to be able to do there. But Murray, outside of his big, he had the big game 5 and he had the big close in, was it game 2?
Yes.
But outside of that, rocky series for him and his the ankle issue that he had been dealing with late in the season into the first round. Like, that's a big deal. And if you can put length on him with McDaniels, put length on him with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, make with Ant, make him work in those ways. That might be Minnesota's best chance of kind of calming down the Denver offense a little bit. And a guy I'm fascinated to watch in this series too is Michael Porter Jr. is coming off, I think, the best postseason performance of his career in round 1 against the Lakers. He was somebody that, like, he had to find other ways to give to the game in the finals last year because his shot was just offline. He said, I think either during the series or after, like, my shot was broken. I had to do other stuff. I had to rebound. I had to defend. I had to move the ball. And he's brought some of that with the shot being online again. And when you look at how do you deal with a giant defense that is physical, that is long, that is in your kitchen, a guy who can shoot over the top of all of that without it being a problem is a nice answer to have. So I think he's a swing piece to watch there. But I mean, it's like you take your Godzilla and your King Kong action figures and you bash them into each other. That's kind of what this feels like. Two huge teams that are, sort of mirror images of one another in terms of the offense and the defense. I think it's going to be a fascinating watch.
Guy I want to look at, Jaden McDaniels.
Yeah.
If we relate this back to Phoenix, something I definitely plan to write about at some point. 2 big differences in the Rudy Gobert, Kevin Durant trades. The first, Rudy Gobert, for all his qualms, for all the fact that players who don't play with him think he's goofy and not that talented, and he did what he did in February or late March 2020. Like, super low maintenance, happy-go-lucky guy. Not been the reputation in totality of Kevin Durant's career, but the Wolves were adamant they were keeping Jaden McDaniels.
Yes.
The Suns were adamant they were keeping Mikal Bridges until things changed once Matt Ishbia took over, and he's now out the door. And what Jaden did across the board, but particularly against Devin Booker in round one, like you're talking about Nickeil Alexander-Walker guarding Jamal, I have a sneaking suspicion that is going to be the starting matchup.
Oh,
for
yeah.
Murray.
I mean, Nickeil comes off the bench. I'm talking about like keeping length on him all the time, but you're absolutely right.
I'm just using that as a transition.
Jaden's job one.
Yes. And that to me is going to be fascinating as he continues to develop and grow and become a real two-way force that's worthy of the huge contract he signed last year. But yeah, there'll be plenty to determine. I mean, right now, if we're being asked to make a prediction, which it says in the rundown,
in the doc we are.
And I don't like making predictions, I'm just going to go with the classic Denver at 7, baby. Give it to me. That's what I'd like to see. I would like 7 games of this series. And I think the people deserve it.
Yeah. I'm put in a difficult position here because I think I've said on microphone before here or somewhere else, like I'm going to be picking Denver until somebody makes me wrong. I think that's where I felt with them. I also picked against the Wolves in round 1 and Wolves fans didn't love that. And like, I got a little bit of pushback on that. Like, here's the receipts, for me being wrong about that. But yeah, I think, so I'm tempted to go back into it and be like, the Wolves are a significantly better playoff team than I thought they would be. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I think I gotta go Denver in 7 as well. Like until proven otherwise, it's going to go through Jokic. I need to see somebody find answers for that team in crunch time 4 times in a series before I believe it. I think like obviously Murray's health and Murray's effectiveness is the big wild card in all of it. There you had Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was also he turned the ankle in the last game there. Like they've got guys coming off of knocks, but if they're healthy, if that starting group is healthy, and if they're able to lean into that for huge minutes, we've yet to see somebody solve that. So I'm very excited to see the Wolves try. I think they've got the pieces to make it tough, but we'll go with Denver in 7 until proven otherwise.
One last final thing I want to say about this series. I almost tweeted it out. I almost did a Dan tweet. I think it was during game 3. Mike Conley is playing so fucking hard.
Yeah.
And he is still so fast and so quick, and seeing him zip down the floor back in transition defense. And there was one clip I saw in some huddle at the end of game 4. I don't know if it was pre or post Chris Finch injury. I don't remember. But there was a huddle where there was a hot mic or someone was mic'd up, or whoever it was, and Conley was looking at Ant and he was going, "Take me there, 5. Take me there, 5," with like the tone of someone in the front row of their favorite concert. And that's been my favorite subplot so far of the playoffs. Like, that dude knows he's only got a couple years left, and the playoff shortcomings that have been there throughout his career. It does, like, this is Ant's team and everyone's following the line, and that's a whole other story in its own right. The fact that Cat has been so willing to take a step back to this guy's rise, but the fact that there's an added element of this team rallying around old man Mike Conley winning one for the Gipper here is like pretty cool, and that's definite juju on Minnesota's side if we want to say something to appease any Timberwolves fans who might be listening and disappointed that we're choosing the rating champs over them.
Yeah, so. I mean, the other thing, quiet playoff gamer. Like, think back, he was part of that Grizzlies team that went to the Western Conference Finals against the Spurs, played through the broken face in was it the second round against the Warriors, like had the monster game with the mask on, like a guy who is super tough, super competitive. Every teammate who's ever been with him absolutely loves him and will run through a wall for him. And, you talked about the Suns can look at the Wolves trade last year and be like, well, see, it worked out for them. In the middle, they went and found Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker to make sense of that team. So not easy to find those midstream pieces, but the Wolves did, and it's made a huge, huge difference for them.
There you go. Tonight, game 6s. We've got Bucks Pacers. We've got Philly, New York. I'll be taking another train down the Northeast Corridor to 30th Street Station.
It's covering the 9 p.m. tip, man. God bless you.
Pretty brutal outcome for you, boy. And everyone else is going to be in attendance. I don't expect to be asleep until like 4 o'clock tonight, but that's a whole nother situation. The one thing I just want to say, it is so funny. Well, pause. It was cool to me as an objective observer who is from Philadelphia and lives in New York to see the Wells Fargo Center crowd in Game 4 kind of split. My thought live was that this is the exact environment that the league was hoping would occur in Las Vegas for the in-season tournament. It was an total argument for those games being played in a neutral site that like is easier for the fan bases of those crowds to get to. I will also say to Joel Embiid or anyone who's been complaining about that, like, to go back to the Jalen Brunson, Anthony Edwards are taking their teams further. Like, Knicks fans are on the ascent, baby. Their prince that was promised, their prophet he is here. He is taking them to new heights. The Sixers are ready to break up with their girlfriend of an abusive relationship for 7 years. So, like, no wonder people are jumping down the Amtrak with me and paying for tickets that are way cheaper at Wells Fargo Center than they are at MSG. But I don't really care about that. All I want to care about and talk about and just mention before we got it is so funny that not only are the Sixers owners purchasing 2,000 tickets to keep them out of the grimy hands of New Yorkers, but the Brickin' for Chicken promotion that Mike Breen had a whole love fest about during the play-in game, I believe it was, against Miami.
Yeah, where yes, the vibes shifted once the 2 free throws got missed.
That has typically only existed in the second halves of Sixers games. But we got a press release yesterday stating that Chick-fil-A and the Sixers are extending the promotion for the entire game with, quote, "By extending the promotion, we hope to create a true home court advantage." So that is the secret weapon here for tonight. It is not filling the minutes when Joel Embiid is on the bench. It is not potentially dusting off D'Anthony Melton or Buddy Hield like every Philly fan I know is complaining. Why aren't they giving some opportunities? I will say, I will look out for that. I think Game 6 with all these people dog-tired is the perfect time to try to see if Buddy Hield can give you something in 3 minutes in the second quarter. But we'll see if that happens. Tonight, though, is about Brickin' for Chicken. If Josh Hart misses 2 free throws in the first half, who knows what could happen, man? The entire course of history could be changed forever because of this.
I think your guy to watch there is, are we going to be seeing intentional fouls on Mitchell Robinson? There's your guy to keep an eye on in the Brickin' for Chicken sweepstakes here. If I was a Philly fan, I might look at it and say, Chick-fil-A is bringing this back because we want to create a real home court advantage. I would feel a little bit insulted by the idea that you would need to do that. But I don't think anyone's going to need any extra ammo, man. Philly's we got back against the wall, season on the line, potentially an era of the team on the line, and they do not like this Knicks team or Knicks fans. So yeah. I think it's going to be extraordinarily loud.
I just want to pour cold water on that. This is totally we're supposed to. I don't think the end of the era thing is in the cards at all. Like, Sixers fans might be ready to throw out Joel Embiid like they did a year ago, and then slowly but surely as the summer progressed, they came right back around. Like, it's one game for sure, but what Maxey did in Game 5, I think, has changed certain tectonic plates beneath the surface here. If Maxey goes out and puts up a stinker in Game 6, I don't even think that will change things, because, like, one thing that was on full display in Game 5, it was clear, and I think if I see Philly force feed Joel the ball and struggle to do that 12 feet out from the block again, over and over and over again, I'm going to be flabbergasted, because the disparity of success with when they're running high screen stuff with Tyrese, and all of a sudden Philly looked a little bit like Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic running pick and roll at the end of the games. Like, there's a dude for this guy to grow with now. He's a bona fide all-star. They've got 60, 70, whatever million in cap space this summer. They're the only team that has contending aspirations that has that type of flexibility in comparison to all the second apron stuff we were talking about at the top of the show. Philly believes that's a huge advantage they have, whether it's Paul George or they split the difference and they get a great backup center and they go after someone like KCP, who knows? But I don't think there's this what will happen in Philly if they lose in the first round with Joel Embiid and the end this era thing. Nick Nurse is not Doc Rivers. Like, he and Daryl have a ton of synergy there. Morey has absolute support of the ownership group. I don't think there's so much at stake other than just like feelings being hurt and how attractive they look to people on the open market. But they will look pretty damn attractive because they're probably the only good team that can pay people. So that's
this whole section will be fascinating to look at, like, in 8 hours. So we'll see. Jake, what's the number on your uniform when you and on your rec league team? I know you've retired now, but what's the number that's going up into the rafters?
I don't even know what my number was.
Oh my God. Pick one. Just pick a number.
I think it was 6.
Take me there, 6. Let's end this show.
Thanks all we got for you today. Thanks to super producer John Gennaro, who does all the things to make the show look and sound great. Subscribe to Ball Don't Lie on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you're currently listening on, and leave us a 5-star review. We thank you for listening, and we'd appreciate it if you came back again next week for another episode of No Cap Room.